My sister used my deepest vulnerability to destroy my relationship with our parents. Okay, Reddit, strap in because this is a lot. I've been lurking forever, occasionally commenting, but I never thought I'd be posting one of those massive, life-imploding sagas. Yet, here I am, typing this out with shaky hands and eyes that feel permanently swollen from crying. It feels like my entire world, or at least the family part of it, has been detonated, and the trigger was pulled by my own sister, Sarah. She took something I shared with her in absolute confidence, during my most vulnerable moment, twisted it into grotesque shapes, and used it to paint me as unstable and untrustworthy to our parents, effectively poisoning years of effort and love. And the worst part? It almost worked. It still might work, long term. I need to get this out somewhere people might understand, because right now, I feel incredibly alone in this wreckage. So, let me set the scene. I'm Megan, 35F, and I have an older sister, Sarah, 38F. We grew up in a pretty standard middle-class suburban family. Mom and Dad are still together, retired now. On the surface, we looked like the perfect family unit. But underneath? There was always this current, this subtle tension, revolving around Sarah. She's always been the star, charismatic, outgoing, effortlessly successful, or so it seemed. She got the scholarships, the promotions, the big group of friends. I was the quiet one, the observer, more introverted, more sensitive. My parents, bless them, always said they loved us equally, and I believe they tried, but Sarah just commanded the spotlight. She knew how to work them, how to tell them what they wanted to hear, how to spin any situation so she came out smelling like roses while subtly casting shade on anyone else, usually me. It wasn't overt bullying, more like a slow erosion. Little digs dressed as jokes, convenient omissions of facts, playing the victim when called out. Growing up, I often felt like I was living in her shadow, constantly trying to measure up or just stay out of her way. My husband, Mark, 36M, noticed it within months of us dating. He used to call her the Teflon Queen because nothing negative ever stuck to her, at least not in our parents' eyes. Things coasted along relatively okay for years. We'd have the usual family gatherings, birthdays, holidays. Sarah would hold court, I'd hang back with Mark, we'd exchange knowing glances. There were little flare-ups, of course. Times she'd conveniently forget to pass on important information, times she'd borrow money from Mom and Dad that mysteriously never got paid back while I was meticulously paying off student loans. Times she'd make passive-aggressive comments about my job, I'm a librarian, she's in marketing, guess which one sounds more impressive at dinner parties? But nothing nuclear. Until Dad got sick last year. It wasn't cancer or anything life-threatening, thank God, but a series of complications from what should have been a routine surgery left him significantly weakened and needing a lot of care for several months. He couldn't drive, needed help with basic tasks, medication management, endless doctor's appointments. Mom, while devoted, isn't in the best health herself, she has arthritis and gets overwhelmed easily. It was clear they needed help. Sarah, naturally, swept in immediately with grand pronouncements. Don't worry Mom, Dad, I've got this. We'll set up a schedule, I'll handle the finances, Megan can pitch in where she can. She lives about an hour away, while Mark and I are only 20 minutes from my parents. And for the first week, Sarah was super daughter. She organized folders, made calls, bought fancy organic groceries. Then, reality hit. Caring for an ailing parent isn't glamorous. It's exhausting, repetitive, often thankless. Suddenly, Sarah's visits became shorter, her calls less frequent. The schedule she created heavily favored her convenience, leaving me with the bulk of the weekday and less desirable tasks, the medication reminders, the helping Dad shower, the frustrating calls with insurance companies. When I'd gently point out the imbalance, she'd sigh dramatically. Meg, you know how demanding my job is right now. This project is huge. Besides, you're closer, it just makes sense. Or worse, she'd imply I wasn't busy enough, it must be nice having a job where you can just take off whenever. Remember, I'm a librarian, taking time off requires arranging coverage and impacts my colleagues, it's not just sitting around reading all day, despite her implications. Mark saw right through it. He'd come home from work to find me utterly drained, sometimes in tears after a particularly difficult day with Dad or a condescending call from Sarah. He started stepping up massively, helping me shuttle Dad to appointments, picking up prescriptions, even just sitting with Mom so she could have a break. He was incredible, but it was putting a strain on us. We were barely seeing each other, our weekends consumed by caregiving while Sarah posted photos on Instagram from brunch or weekend getaways, often captioned with something vague like much needed recharge after a stressful week #family first. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Meanwhile, in front of Mom and Dad, Sarah maintained the illusion of being the organizer-in-chief. She'd breeze in on a Saturday afternoon with flowers, chat cheerfully for an hour while I was cleaning the bathroom or sorting pills, then leave, telling Mom and Dad to call her if they needed anything, knowing full well they'd likely call me first because I was physically present and reliable. She'd also call them frequently just to check in, read, manage her image, asking leading questions like, "Is Megan managing okay? I worry about her, she seems so stressed." Planting seeds of doubt. The breaking point for me came about 2 months into this arrangement. Mark and I were under significant financial stress. We'd had some unexpected house repairs, and the extra driving back and forth, taking time off work, some unpaid, was adding up. On top of that, the emotional toll was immense. I felt invisible, unappreciated, and increasingly resentful of Sarah's performative caregiving. One evening, after a particularly awful day where Dad had a fall, he was okay, just shaken, and Sarah's only contribution was texting me to make sure Mom wasn't too upset. I just snapped. Not outwardly, but inside. I felt utterly alone. Later that week, Sarah called me. Not to ask about Dad, but to complain about something trivial related to her work. I was already fragile, and something in her voice, that casual assumption that her minor inconveniences were the center of the universe while I was drowning, just broke down my defenses. I started crying. And then, foolishly, desperately needing someone in my family to understand, I confided in her. I told her how hard it was. How exhausted I was. How Mark and I were fighting more because of the stress. How worried I was about money. I even admitted, and this is the part that haunts me, that sometimes, I felt like I was losing my mind, like the pressure was too much and I didn't know how I was going to keep going. I wasn't suicidal or anything dramatic, just expressing deep burnout and vulnerability. It felt like a confession, whispered into the abyss. Sarah was surprisingly sympathetic on the phone. "Oh, Meg, I had no idea it was that bad. You should have told me sooner. Why are you carrying all this alone? We need to support you." She promised she'd talk to Mom and Dad, figure out a way to take more pressure off me, maybe look into some short-term home help. For a fleeting moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she did care. Maybe this crisis would finally make her see beyond herself. What a fool I was. A few days later, I went over to my parents' house. The atmosphere was weird. Mom was overly solicitous, asking me if I was feeling all right in a way that felt loaded. Dad was quiet, avoiding eye contact. I brushed it off, thinking maybe they were just having an off day. Then Mom said, "Honey, Sarah called us. She's very concerned about you." My stomach plummeted. Concerned? About what? Well, Mom hesitated, fiddling with her teacup. "She told us about your struggles. How overwhelmed you are. How you're having trouble coping, emotionally. She mentioned you felt like you were losing your mind?" Mom emphasized that last part, her eyes wide with worry. I stared at her, speechless. The blood drained from my face. Sarah hadn't just shared my confidence, she had twisted it, amplified it, and presented it as evidence of my instability. She also mentioned, Mom continued, her voice lowering, that you and Mark are having significant problems because of the stress, and that you're worried about money. She suggested maybe it would be best if she took over managing Dad's care more directly, perhaps even handling their finances for a while, just to take the burden off you until you're feeling more stable. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. It wasn't concern, it was a calculated coup. She had used my moment of raw honesty, my cry for help, as ammunition to discredit me and position herself as the responsible, stable savior. She'd painted my exhaustion as incompetence, my financial worries as irresponsibility, my emotional vulnerability as mental instability. It was masterful manipulation, tailored perfectly to play on our parents' protective instincts and their lifelong perception of Sarah as the capable one and me as the sensitive, slightly fragile one. "Mom," I finally choked out, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. That's not what I said. Not how I said it. I confided in her because I was having a hard time, yes. Because she hasn't been pulling her weight. I told her I was stressed, not unstable. She twisted everything. Dad finally looked at me, his expression clouded. "Megan," Sarah seemed genuinely worried. She cried on the phone. She said she didn't want to betray your confidence, but she felt she had to tell us because she was scared for you, and for us, if you weren't coping. Cried. Of course she cried. Crocodile tears were always part of her arsenal. I tried to explain. I laid out the schedule disparity, the lack of support, the constant feeling of being undermined. I told them Sarah barely did anything tangible but swooped in for the photo ops. But I could see the doubt in their eyes. Sarah had gotten there first. She had framed the narrative. My explanation, fueled by hurt and anger, probably sounded defensive, maybe even a little hysterical, which only played into the picture Sarah had painted. "Honey, maybe you are just overwrought," Mom said gently. "It's understandable. Maybe taking a step back is a good idea." Sarah has offered. "Offered to do what, Mom?" I interrupted, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Offered to finally do her fair share? Or offered to take control and make herself look good while continuing to do the bare minimum? "That's not fair, Megan," Dad said sternly. "Your sister is trying to help." Trying to help? Or trying to consolidate her power, ensure she remained the golden child, even leveraging our father's illness to do it? The injustice burned in my chest. I looked at my parents, the people who were supposed to know me best, and saw Sarah's distorted reflection staring back at me. They weren't seeing me, they were seeing the caricature Sarah had expertly crafted. I couldn't stay there. I mumbled something about needing to leave and practically ran out of the house, tears streaming down my face. I drove home in a blind haze of fury and betrayal. Mark found me sobbing uncontrollably on the couch when he got home. Explaining it to him felt like ripping open a wound. He was livid, but not surprised. "I told you, Meg," he said, holding me tight. "She's always been like this. This is just next level. Weaponizing your vulnerability? That's low, even for her." His anger was validating, but it didn't fix the situation with my parents. The next few weeks were hell. Sarah, playing the role of concerned sister to perfection, started calling me constantly. "How are you feeling, Meg? Really? Have you thought about talking to someone? Maybe taking some time off? Mom and Dad are worried sick, you know." Every word felt like a tiny, poisonous dart. She seamlessly took over scheduling appointments, communicating updates, often filtered through her lens, and generally acting like she was managing everything, while I was relegated to the sidelines, treated like a fragile C-teamer. When I tried to push back, to reassert my role or correct her narrative, she'd shut me down with feigned concern. "Megan, please don't stress yourself out. We've got this handled. Focus on getting better." Or she'd tell Mom and Dad. I tried to include Megan, but she got so upset/agitated/confused. "I really think she needs space." She gaslighted me relentlessly. If I showed anger, I was proving her point about my instability. If I was quiet, I was sulking or incapable. There was no way to win. The extended family started getting involved, subtly at first. An aunt called, ostensibly to check on Dad, but then casually mentioned, "Sarah said you're going through a tough time, dear. Anything I can do?" A cousin texted, "Heard things are stressful. Hope you're taking care of yourself." Sarah was clearly managing the narrative beyond just my parents, painting herself as the dutiful daughter holding everything together while her poor sister was crumbling. Gossip, dressed up as concern, spread like wildfire. Mark was my rock. He encouraged me not to just roll over. "You can't let her rewrite reality, Megan. Your parents might be blinded right now, but the truth has a way of coming out." Together, we decided on a strategy. I would stop engaging with Sarah directly unless absolutely necessary. I would continue to show up for my parents, calmly and consistently, doing the things I'd always done, but I wouldn't fight for credit or try to disprove Sarah's lies anymore. I'd just be there. And I started documenting everything. Texts from Sarah showing her flakiness, times I covered for her, discrepancies in what she told me versus what she told our parents. It felt clinical and awful, compiling evidence against my own sister, but I felt I had no other choice. One afternoon, I was at my parents' helping Mom with some paperwork. Dad was napping. Sarah was supposed to have dropped off some medical supplies earlier but, predictably, had texted an hour before saying she was stuck in traffic and asked if I could grab them instead. While looking for a specific pharmacy receipt in the folder Sarah had so proudly organized, I found something else tucked away: emails. Not just any emails, but printouts of emails between Sarah and a financial advisor. They were discussing Mom and Dad's accounts. Not just managing bill payments, but exploring options for moving investments, changing beneficiaries, even getting power of attorney. The dates on the emails went back before my so-called breakdown, back to the very beginning of Dad's illness. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about control or image. This was about money. Sarah wasn't just trying to sideline me from caregiving, she was potentially trying to gain control over their finances using my manufactured instability as justification. The concern about my money worries suddenly clicked into place. She wasn't worried for me, She was using it as proof I couldn't be trusted with financial matters, paving the way for her to take over. I felt sick. I quickly took photos of the emails with my phone, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold it steady. This was worse than I could have imagined. Her betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was potentially financially predatory towards our parents, using me as a pawn in her game. Armed with this new, sickening information, I knew I couldn't just passively wait for the truth to emerge. I had to force a confrontation. Mark agreed. He said we needed to present everything calmly but firmly, preferably with both parents present and perhaps even a neutral third party if possible. We decided the best time would be the following Sunday. Sarah always did her performative big visit on Sunday afternoons. I called my parents and said Mark and I needed to talk to them about Dad's care and future planning, and it was important Sarah was there too. I kept my tone calm and neutral, giving no hint of what was coming. They agreed, likely thinking it was about formalizing the arrangement Sarah had proposed. Sarah, when I texted her about the meeting, keeping it brief and factual, replied with a saccharine, "Of course. So glad we can all get on the same page to support Mom and Dad," smiley face emoji. The emoji made me want to throw my phone. That Sunday felt like the longest day of my life. Mark and I went over early. I felt nauseous, my heart pounding against my ribs. Sarah arrived right on time, beaming, carrying a basket of artisanal muffins. "Just thought we could use a little treat," she chirped, avoiding my eyes. We sat in the living room, Mom, Dad, Sarah, Mark, and me. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Sarah immediately tried to take control, launching into a spiel about how she'd been talking to doctors and how she thought she had a really streamlined plan moving forward. I let her talk for a few minutes, then I held up my hand. "Sarah, before we get into your plan, Mark and I have some things we need to clear up." Sarah looked momentarily surprised, then pasted on a concerned expression. "Oh? Is everything okay, Meg?" "No, Sarah, it's not," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Mark put a reassuring hand on my knee. "It's about what you told Mom and Dad about me. And about what you've actually been doing." I started calmly, laying out the sequence of events. How I'd confided in her during a moment of weakness. How she'd twisted my words, burnout becoming instability, stress becoming unable to cope. How she used that to undermine me with our parents. I saw Mom and Dad exchange uneasy glances. Sarah started to interrupt. "Megan, that's not fair, I was worried." "Let me finish, Sarah," I said firmly. "You painted a picture of me falling apart to justify you taking over. But the reality is, you created this narrative because you weren't stepping up. You wanted the credit without the work, and you saw an opportunity to make me look bad so you could look good." Sarah scoffed. "That's ridiculous. You were falling apart. Ask Mom and Dad." I was struggling, I acknowledged, looking directly at my parents. Because I was doing the bulk of the work while Sarah flaked out repeatedly. "I have texts, schedules." I pulled out my phone, but before I could show them, I decided to go for the jugular. "But this isn't just about you dodging responsibility, Sarah. It's about what you were planning behind everyone's back." I looked at her. "Why were you emailing financial advisors about Mom and Dad's investments and power of attorney weeks ago, Sarah? Before you even knew I was struggling?" The color drained from Sarah's face. Mom and Dad looked utterly confused. "What is she talking about, Sarah?" Dad asked, his voice sharp.
Sarah stammered, I was just being proactive.
Looking into options. Someone has to manage things responsibly." "Responsibly?" Mark cut in, his voice dangerously quiet. "Or opportunistically? Funny how your proactive planning coincided with manufacturing a crisis about Megan's stability to justify you taking control, isn't it?" "That's not true," Sarah shrieked, finally dropping the calm facade. "Megan is twisting things. She's always been jealous of me. She's trying to turn you against me." "Show them the emails, Megan," Mark prompted gently. I took a deep breath and showed my parents the photos on my phone, the dates, the discussion topics, the specific advisor's name. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad stared at the screen, then at Sarah, his face hardening. "Sarah," Dad said, his voice low and laced with disbelief. "What is this? Why were you doing this without talking to us? And why did you lie about Megan?" Sarah completely lost it. The confident, charming mask crumbled, replaced by a spitting fury I hadn't seen since we were kids. "Because she's always been the favorite," she yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Even when she's screwing up, you always coddle her. I do everything right, I manage everything, and nobody appreciates it. I saw this coming. Dad gets sick, And suddenly fragile little Megan needs all the attention again. Someone had to take charge. Someone responsible. The sheer projection was stunning. She was the one coddled, the one who got away with everything. The resentment pouring out of her was ugly and raw, twisting years of perceived slights into justification for her actions. Appreciates it? I shot back, my own anger boiling over. You've barely lifted a finger. You show up for an hour, take some photos, and disappear. Mark and I have been here day in and day out. Helping Dad shower, managing his meds, dealing with insurance nightmares, while you were researching how to get control of their money. And you use my pain, the vulnerability I shared with you, my sister, as your weapon? How could you? The room fell silent except for Sarah's ragged breathing. Mom was crying silently. Dad looked older, deeply wounded. He looked at Sarah, then at me, then back at Sarah. The justification, the charm, the manipulation, it had all evaporated, leaving behind something grasping and ugly. Sarah, Dad said finally, his voice heavy with disappointment. I think you need to leave. Sarah stared at him, aghast. Dad? You're kicking me out? You believe her? I believe what I saw in those emails, Dad said tiredly. And I believe I haven't seen the daughter I thought I knew for a long time. Please. Just go. Sarah shot me a look filled with pure hatred, grabbed her purse, and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence she left behind was deafening. Mom reached out and took my hand. Megan. We're so sorry. We should have seen. We should have listened to you. You believed her, I whispered, the hurt still raw. We were worried, Dad said, his voice thick. About you, about the situation. She played on that. But we should have known better. We do know you, honey. We just got scared. It wasn't a perfect apology, maybe, but it was a start. We sat there for a long time, talking. Really talking. I explained everything, the exhaustion, the resentment, the pain of her betrayal. They listened, really listened this time. They acknowledged their part in enabling Sarah's behavior over the years, the unintentional favoritism, the way they'd always let her smooth things over. It was painful and messy, but it felt real. Like we were finally cutting through decades of pretense. That confrontation was several months ago now. The aftermath has been complicated. Sarah is essentially persona non grata. After she left that day, she sent a barrage of furious texts, first defending herself, then attacking me, then trying to guilt-trip Mom and Dad. When none of that worked, she went silent. We haven't spoken since. According to an aunt, who awkwardly called me to apologize for believing the gossip, Sarah has been playing the victim to the wider family, claiming I manipulated our parents and engineered the whole thing out of jealousy. Some relatives seem to believe her, or at least want to stay neutral to avoid drama. Others have reached out to me privately, offering support and sharing their own past uncomfortable experiences with Sarah's manipulations, which was validating but also sad. The perfect family image is well and truly shattered. Dad's health has improved significantly, thankfully. Mark and I are still involved in helping out, but Mom and Dad are much more proactive about managing things themselves and ensuring the burden is fair. They check in with me regularly, not out of suspicion, but genuinely asking how I'm doing. Our relationship feels different. More honest, but also tinged with sadness for what was lost, for the trust that was broken, not just by Sarah, but by their initial willingness to believe her lies. We're rebuilding, slowly. Mark and I are stronger than ever. Going through this solidified our bond in ways I couldn't have imagined. He saw me at my lowest, validated my feelings, and stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. I wouldn't have gotten through it without him. As for me, I'm still processing. The betrayal cut deeper than I can express. Having your sister weaponize your deepest vulnerability is a unique kind of agony. It's forced me to reevaluate my entire childhood, to see the subtle patterns of manipulation and favoritism that I'd always vaguely sensed but could never quite articulate. There's grief there, grief for the sister I thought I had, or wished I had. Grief for the idealized family I wanted to believe in. But there's also growth. Awful, painful, unwanted growth, but growth nonetheless. I learned that my sensitivity isn't a weakness, though Sarah tried to frame it that way. I learned the vital importance of boundaries. I learned that sometimes, the people you expect to have your back will be the ones to stab you in it, and sometimes, the people you build your own life with, like Mark, become your true family. I learned that documenting things, while feeling gross, can sometimes be necessary armor. And I learned that my voice matters, even if it trembles when I use it. I don't know if our family will ever fully heal. The rift with Sarah feels permanent. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe removing that toxic dynamic, however painfully, was necessary for healthier relationships to form with my parents, and for my own mental health. It still hurts. Some days the anger and sadness wash over me unexpectedly. But I'm not drowning anymore. I'm standing on the shore, looking at the wreckage, and slowly, tentatively, starting to rebuild. It's not the life I expected, but it's mine. And for the first time, I feel like I'm allowed to live it without constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next subtle undermining comment or manipulative play from the Teflon Queen. The Teflon finally cracked. And maybe, just maybe, I did too, but I'm putting the pieces back together stronger. Thanks for reading, Reddit. It helps just getting it all out.